Welcome to this episode of NLN Podcast Nursing Edge Unscripted. I'm your host, Dr. Stephen Palazzo, a member of the editorial board for Nursing Education Perspectives. In this episode, we will discuss relevance, clarity, and reliability and validity of a new instrument for nurse educators that measures self-perception of leadership competency. My guests today are Dr. Ann Krouse, Dean, Widener University School of Nursing in Chester, Pennsylvania. And with us also is Dr. Karen Morin, Professor Emerita at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and visiting professor at Teachers College, Columbia University. We will discuss their article, Assessment of Nurse Educator Leadership, Instrument Development and Psychometric Analysis. This article can be found in the July-August 2024 issue of Nursing Education Perspectives. Welcome to our guest.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great to be here.
Wonderful to have you. So let's get started. Briefly, if you could describe the aims of your study and how it relates to your earlier work on nurse educator leadership and leadership in nursing education tool that was developed.
So I'll get started. Dr. Barbara Patterson and I did the initial study where we identified the competencies for nurse faculty leaders. When you look at leadership development and how do you translate this empirical research into something practical for someone to use to develop themselves as a leader, we decided that we would develop the instrument to provide a tool that people could really use to evaluate their own personal leadership. And important is to note is that our definition of leaders when we did the initial study, and as well as when we did the instrument development, was that it's not just someone who's in a formal leadership position, but it's someone who is a leader in many different ways or sees themselves as a leader in nursing education. So we brought in Dr. Morin, who was an expert in instrument development, and we developed a great partnership. So I'll turn it over to Karen now.
Right. Yes, I was delighted to be invited to be part of this team. And though my scholarship certainly hasn't been quite as directed in leadership, my practice certainly has been in leadership because I've been so involved in leadership development programs. And so I think that's a nice way to merge what you've been doing in your life with the scholarship that's required of it. And I've always believed that we are missing an opportunity in nursing education when we don't acknowledge and foster the leadership of faculty writ large, not those that necessarily, those that are in positions of leadership as well, but all of us, I think, bring leadership abilities to the table. And I think the instrument that's been developed is a really nice way to help us understand and appreciate what attributes we have to bring to the table.
That's a great summary of the work and the tool you developed. So specifically, if we were going to ask, when we're looking at a tool like this, describe how useful do you believe the tool is, the LEN, for measuring perceived leadership competency in diverse populations such as people of color, LGBTQI, and men specifically? Perhaps we're seeing what is important for traditional demographic of nurse leaders and missing a new generation of leaders with different ideas about leadership. What are your thoughts on this?
Go ahead, Karen.
Well, I have been thinking a lot about that question, and I don't think that's not we did not elicit those demographics in terms of describing our particular participants. I think it's a really great point. I I might say it because I've really been thinking about this, that these attributes, when you think about them, the four major ones, I think really are pretty universal. And so I wonder whether or not I would want to explore whether or not different populations perceive it differently. I mean, it's an interesting thought and one to pursue because I'd love to be proven wrong, as always. But I really wonder about that. I was just
Hmm.
reading another book on leadership, and the qualities are things like gratitude and empathy and resilience. And I would argue that irrespective of who we are, we all bring those to the table. So I'll yield to Anne.
I agree 100% with Karen. I do think there's value in looking at the data to see whether there are significant differences. And I think we'll have the opportunity going forward. Already, we're getting a lot of nurse researchers asking for use of the instrument. And so we will have, as they share their raw data with us, we will have the opportunity to possibly explore other populations that it's used with. And even we've been asked by individuals globally to be able to translate the instrument and explore it from that perspective as well. So my initial sense is, as Karen says, that these are really very global competencies.
Hmm.
But there might be differences, and we just had a discussion about our next steps with the instrument development. One is that we are going to publish data that we have related to an international study that we did with the instrument looking at the psychometrics. But one of the things that has been, as a dean, on my mind has been, have things changed since the pandemic with
Mm.
nursing
Right.
education leadership? And particularly related to resilience, crisis management, preparation for crisis management, and how does that play into leadership competencies, not only for someone who's in a formal leadership role like I am, but for faculty, who had to pivot really quickly and who are still experiencing the effects of the pandemic on students and their learning deficits.
Well, I'm
I'm
happy. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
No, and I'm thinking as we move forward with this, it's to also gather some of that information to which you referred in terms of identity, right,
Hmm.
of our respondents. So that will be really helpful. So anyway,
Yeah, I appreciate. I'm happy to hear that the tool is being adopted by others, and hopefully podcasts like this will help encourage others too to look at
yeah,
the tool and its relevance for them and use it. I see, I guess the question for me and why I had that question in there was thinking about, as a gay male myself, do I see empathy and gratitude differently in how I
true,
practice leadership, right?
true, true.
And my suspicion would be probably yes, a little bit. And so that would be some information that would be really helpful to reveal if there is any kind of difference. And if so, how does that translate then into the delivery, right?
Correct. So the attribute, you could probably have a universal definition, but how it
Hmm.
plays out may be different. And we know that
Right.
already when we look at male-female
Hmm.
communication, leader communication, we see that for certain. So it is an interesting perspective and one worth pursuing for sure.
Yeah, the attribute doesn't change much, the
No.
definition of it, but you're right, how it is
Yeah,
expressed or
yeah,
displayed
yeah,
could
yeah.
look differently depending on the demographic.
Right.
Yeah. And I
So,
think about the instrument development, and we use the task statements that came from the original study in the development of this instrument. So perhaps even as we see differences, like we should see differences, right? As we look at different populations. It might be helpful for us to go back and do qualitative studies with these groups or, go back and do another Delphi to see whether we can refine these task statements a little bit so that they're more applicable to a wider variety of populations.
Right. How would nurse leaders use this tool? And again, how you being a nurse leader, not being like a formal definition, but how we self-identify maybe as a leader. How would someone in that position use these leadership competencies in with their nursing faculty?
I'm all about faculty development. And so and I know that deans are always about faculty development. So I think it's a tool in the toolkit of assessing your abilities as a leader. And there are many, we know that. So I look at this as an additional one. And what's nice about this from my perspective, remember I'm the one that was brought on, the newest kid on the block here, is the fact that this is nursing. And so we have gathered information about nurses. So I love Krouse and Dr, but Krouse and Dr is a broader perspective, different perspective. And the fact that this instrument was developed based on input from nurse faculty, I think makes it a strength. And then I would have the conversation and say, gee, let's have this, all of you have leadership essential. Let's look and see where you are and how we can help you develop further.
You mentioned Krouse and Dr. That just brings back a lot of memories from about 12 years ago at the Nurse Faculty Leadership Academy. That's one of the frameworks that is embedded in me that continues to this day. Yeah.
And their model too is really global as well. And so, when you think about the traits, I'm trying to remember exactly the use of
it's an inventory. So
yes.
No, the inventory.
Yeah.
But so model the way. Like it's just very global, but it is how you implement it in your own practice as a leader,
Right.
in terms of how maybe is more reflective of your own identity.
As we're talking about this, wouldn't it be fun to then say, okay, we've looked at the instrument we've developed, and then compare it to see whether what are the attributes? Do they surface over time so that we know that there's some great consistency in terms of that, or maybe there are really important differences, right, in how we perceive leadership as nurses. And so that would be a great exercise, another study to do.
For our listeners, there's a lot of opportunities here to work with this tool and help develop this tool and refine it, right? And you've got two great leaders here that probably would be very encouraging for that. Any final thoughts or anything you want to leave our listeners with that we didn't cover related to your article?
I think just, one thought is that, I really encourage faculty that are listening to this to pursue their own leadership development in whatever way they want to go forward as a leader, whether it is a formal role or just being a leader in their school, in their course, whatever it is. It's so badly needed in nursing education. Nurses that come from practice that go into nursing education bring a lot to the table in terms of leadership skills already. So I would just really encourage people to take that plunge.
I would agree. I read a book that said, act like a leader and then think like a leader. If you keep acting like a leader, eventually you realize that, oh, maybe I am a leader, and you can move forward. So I echo Anne's comments. All of us have leadership potential, and I think it's up to us to be able to examine that and appreciate it. And as faculty, we have a responsibility to demonstrate that.
I want to thank both of you personally for your championing leadership in nursing education over the years. And having you both as guests today has been very beneficial for not only myself, but I know our listeners. They'll be very excited to listen to your perspectives. I appreciate your time and expertise in broadening our understanding of the work that you've been doing and how we can introduce some of this work in our own institutions. And to our listeners, I just want to mention again that if you had not had the opportunity, please look for their work, Assessment of Nurse Educator Leadership, Instrument Development and Psychometric Analysis in the July-August 2024 issue of Nursing Education Perspectives. And thank you both for joining us, and thank you to our listeners too.
Thank you. Good
Thank
luck.
you.